Procurated for a little over a year, and it is the best decision I've made. Being able to talk to you suppliers and you buyers out there and doing work that's really important and really about supporting the ecosystem of transparency, camaraderie, and community. So without further ado, I want to introduce you guys to our special guest webinar panelist, Mr. Kerry Kirkland. He is the Deputy Secretary for Diversity, Inclusion, and Small Business Opportunities for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In his office, he deals with all matters related to the development of statewide policies and programs to increase the participation of small and diverse businesses, small businesses, contracting, and things that deal with Pennsylvania's overall economy. Under his leadership, the Department of General Services commissioned the first Commonwealth disparity study. They purchased the state-of-art compliance data collection and tracking system, and they implemented the Commonwealth Small and Small Diverse Business Development Program. Prior to this, he served as the Associate Deputy Administrator and Regional Administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, the Vice President of the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce, and Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. Mr. Kirkland is the co-founder of the American Contract Compliance Association, the largest membership-based contract compliance training organization in the world. And he is the founder of the African American Political and Leadership Roundtable. I don't know if you guys are as pumped up and excited as I am, but when you hear from this gentleman, you are going to be inspired, motivated, and you're going to be out there with the tools to catapult your business and buyers for you guys to make really, really good and informed decisions. So without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Deputy Secretary Kirkland, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hello, Denitra, and thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar today. Well, you said it all just about. I don't know what else I can add. However, you know, I was born and raised in York, Pennsylvania. My grandfather came up from South Carolina. He was a World War I veteran and a sharecropper in Bamberg, South Carolina. In 1921, he was on his way to Philadelphia and happened to stop off in York and decided to stay. And, you know, and make no mistake about it, when I was born, one of my most vivid memories are my family talking about their experiences in the South, why he was a sharecropper and the difficulty they had seeking out and obtaining opportunities in the area in which he was raised. And I knew at a very early age that I wanted to be a part of making life better for people in unrepresented neighborhoods and communities across the country. I knew that at a very, very, very early age. When I started doing this work more formally, actually, a gentleman by the name of Julius McCoy, who was an All-American basketball player out of Michigan State. He happened to also be the director of the Office of Civil Rights in the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. In 1978, I started working with him. And it's strange how I started working with him because we were playing against each other in a basketball game. And he had asked, after the game, he had asked me where I worked and the type of work that I did. And after I explained it to him, he told me that he had an opening in his office and he asked me if I would be interested. I went over and I applied, and lo and behold, I was hired. And that was my first job doing this type of work in terms of equity and inclusion. I was working for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. At the time, they had a 10% set-aside program. The program was designed to ensure that people of color were receiving at least 10% of the federal contracts that was mandated by the federal government here in the state of Pennsylvania. And through that work with Julius, he inspired me and encouraged me to do more in this particular field. I left transportation, went over to general services, went to the governor's office, moved over to labor and industry, a couple of different agencies in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. and ended up coming back working for Governor Wolf back in 2015. And that's where I've been ever since. I'm now the Deputy Secretary of Diversity, Inclusion, and Small Business Opportunities. And I'm just the luckiest person in the world because I work with a team of incredible staff. I'm a team of dedicated, committed staff that just go above and beyond the call of duty to get the job done on behalf of our clients. If I could say anything regarding this particular staff, they set the tone for it to be a wonderful time to do business in Pennsylvania. And most of the credit, I would suggest, would go to the staff at the Bureau of Diversity, Inclusion, and Small Business Opportunities.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kirkland, for giving us a little bit more insight into who you are. I want to say a big thank you to you and your team for all that you guys do and for leading the way. And you guys are going to hear some awesome stuff. One of the things that I read, because I did a little bit of research on you, Mr. Kirkland, and there is so much out there, but the one thing that kind of stuck out to me is that I read that the father of affirmative action, Mr. Arthur Fletcher, was one of your mentors. Can you tell me about him and the impact that he had on you and what it is that you do right now?
Art had a profound impact on me throughout my career. I've known Art. I think I met him shortly after I went to work with Julius McCoy in 1978. But Art was he was the son of a Buffalo soldier. He grew up in Arizona, and he was probably one of the most remarkable individuals in this space that I've ever met. He's the founder of affirmative action in this country, and he's considered the godfather of affirmative action by many folks in our space. Art, he started out and he lived on military bases his whole life, and he ended up after he had a dream of going to the University of Kansas and playing football. But during that time, Kansas wasn't accepting African Americans. He did not go. He went to the military and ended up being shipped over to Germany with General George Patton in the Red Ball Express. Well, while he was there, he was shot by a sniper, and most people didn't think he was going to live, let alone come back to the States and play professional football. But he rehabbed over in France for about a year, came back over to America. He went back to college first, Washburn State University, became an All-American football player and a track star there, and ended up going out to California and playing for the Los Angeles Rams. He then became the first African-American to play for the Baltimore Colts. But Art Fletcher was just an incredible, and he also had a stint in the Canadian Football League, but politics and equity and inclusion was his passion. Art, he moved to Kansas, and while he was at Kansas, he was helping Thurgood Marshall raise money. This was in the early 1950s. He helped Thurgood Marshall in 1953 and 1954 raise money to litigate Topeka versus the School Board of Kansas. And that case was a seminal case, as you know, that created desegregation of our schools in this nation. Art was instrumental in helping raise the money for that to happen. However, it came at an incredible price. As I mentioned, Art he had a used car business. He was selling used cars to all the servicemen up and down that corridor, that military corridor from Texas to Chicago. And he was, not only was he selling used cars, he was also providing entertainment to the troops. He was bringing in people like Bill Doggett, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie on the base to provide that entertainment. And through those funds, he was helping to provide the monetary support for Thurgood to litigate that case. Well, what happened was the establishment became extremely angry at him. And during that time, Art was married. He had 5 children, and he had a fairly comfortable life. But when he started raising money, for that case, the establishment, they thought he was a troublemaker, and they pretty much, he told me that they shut down his ability to get banquet halls for his shows. They called his line of credit for his used car dealership, and he was out of business before he knew it. And in fact, he told me not long after that, he couldn't find a job, he or his wife, in the state of Kansas. So he had to leave Kansas and he went to California. And when he went to California, he thought he had a job pretty much lined up when he went to California. A couple of friends were helping him, and he wanted to teach again. So when he went back out to California, he thought he had a teacher's job lined up. But when he got to the school, when he was about to start, the day he was about to begin, they told him that they did a background check on him, and they were told that he was a troublemaker back in Kansas. So they refused to hire him. And Art, at that time, it was just extremely difficult. He couldn't find a job in Kansas. Now he had difficulty in California. His wife became extremely distraught. And she thought that, the establishment was so mad at him that they would not allow him to work again, and he would be unable to take care of his family. So Art told me he was extremely afraid to go back and tell his wife that the school district refused to hire him after they conducted the background check. So he finally got the courage to go back and tell his wife, and he shared the news with his wife. His wife was already distraught after they left Kansas, and she took the car, she drove to the middle of the Bay Bridge, San Francisco Bay Bridge, and jumped off and committed suicide. That story had a profound impact on me and how he shared that with me. Art Fletcher was the kind of a person, he would do anything for anybody. And I think most people who knew Art realized that. But when Art shared that story with me, I just felt that that's the space that I wanted to be in. I wanted to pick up his mantle. I wanted to help. I wanted to do exactly what he was doing to help life better for people in challenging communities and neighborhoods all across the country. So Art had an absolute profound impact. Art is the guy, he worked for the United Negro College Fund. He's the guy who coined the phrase, "A mind is a terrible thing to waste." He was also chairman of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. I had the distinct privilege and honor of traveling to South Africa and work with Nelson Mandela with him. And it was amazing because we were engaged in equity management workshops while we were there. Art Fletcher, he died in 2005. It was probably the saddest day of my life. But Art Fletcher, he's the guy who I mentioned that he created affirmative action at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. It was during the building of the USS Eisenhower. And Art noticed that, minorities and women wasn't being hired in the shipyards. And he drafted a proposal, the first Philadelphia plan that turned into affirmative action. But he worked for 4 separate presidents. He advised 4 separate presidents. He was a man way behind his time, way before his time. And I think history will be extremely kind for all the work that he's accomplished and the work in trying to uplift communities that have been disenfranchised throughout the years. Art Fletcher was an extremely important person in this country, and it was an absolute honor and pleasure to meet him. You know how I started working with Art? I told him, I said, if he would allow me to carry his bags, I would follow him all over the country. And he took me up on it. He said, okay. And I carried his bags for about 20 years as he engaged in his work. And we became extremely good friends. York, Pennsylvania was one of his favorite places. He stayed with me a lot of times, and I soaked up his knowledge and information for a lot of years as I worked with him and traveled with him throughout the nation.
Well, I am so happy to hear about your history with Arthur Fletcher and how his impact definitely helped you be able to remain as a trailblazer and someone that is leading the charge for ensuring that everyone gets a fair seat at the table. And so that brings me to this question. So you've traveled, you've been all over the world, you've seen so many things. What brought you to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
That basketball game that I told you about, I playing with Julius McCoy, and that started me off. Actually, that basketball game sort of changed my life. And when I went back, actually, I went to work. I went to work for Julius McCoy initially over in the Department of Transportation, and that was not long after I had gotten out of the military. While I was in college, I decided that I was going to join the military. I did. I was a Vietnam veteran. I came back, and Julius asked me, as I mentioned after that basketball game, if I was interested in a position with him, and I was. And that, in fact, I met Art Fletcher through Julius McCoy, and that's what really got my career started. But I came to the state basically working with Julius, trying to learn as much as I can about the field so I can try to make my mark on the profession.
Okay. So, everyone is super, everyone that I've talked to about having you lead this webinar was super excited to just pull some of your knowledge and your experience and the things that you've done with the supplier diversity programs within the Commonwealth and what that looks like. So I kind of want to jump into finding out what was the supplier diversity program like when you arrived at the Commonwealth?
Well, it had a lot to be desired. I have to tell you, back in the late 70s and the early 80s, it was a dogfight. As most people know in this space, starting in 78, 81, we started seeing a barrage of litigation directed at these programs. The Croson case, the Adirondack case in the 80s. In seminal cases that sort of set the tone for how these programs was going to be operated and managed throughout the nation. But in the late 70s and early 80s, the participation rate was extremely low in state government, notwithstanding the fact that we had a 10% set-aside program on the federal side. They seem to be doing a little bit better than the overall state was doing at that time as it related to the utilization of small diverse contractors. But the numbers were extremely low. We've never conducted a disparity study, so we had to sort of tread light on the type of programming that we were engaging because there was no constitutional foundation without a disparity study. So we were sort of just plugging holes as we were going. We didn't have any data collection systems. We didn't know anything about data analytics at the time, and we weren't maintaining the kind of data that we maintain now. We weren't monitoring the type of data that we monitor now. We weren't exposed to the new technology that allow us to track and develop reports that we do now. So it was extremely challenging, and it was all based on the value that the incoming administration had. If they had a high value on diversity and inclusion, it seemed like we were allowed to do a little bit more work during that time. If the value wasn't as high on diversity and inclusion with that particular administration, then there was not a whole lot of emphasis on these programs. So it was extremely challenging. And I think during those early days in the profession, we were trying to make the business case as to why these programs were important. But it was extremely challenging, and it was not a whole lot of participation in the early days.
Well, let me ask you, you mentioned the disparity study. Would you happen to remember the percentage of SDB, small and diverse businesses, when you kind of first started? Because I want to show people how the work that you and your team have done has really, if we're talking about numbers and stacks, skyrocketed and has shown the Commonwealth something they've never seen before. So when you first started, what was your percentage of SDBs?
The percentage when we was back in those days was probably somewhere around the 4 and 5% range. And that was all the protected classes, all minorities, females, persons with disabilities, veterans, LGBT business owners, you name it. Our performance was extremely meek during those early days.
Okay.
Now,
And what?
I can tell you as it relates to the disparity study back in 2015, we were
Mhm.
doing about 4.8% of our business with all those small businesses that I described. And Governor Wolf, who in my opinion, developed the strongest executive order ever, came out and he put together a council on diversity, inclusion, and small business opportunities. And that sort of set the tone of where we were going to go. Back in 2000, I mentioned, and we were spending about $4.5 billion a year on goods and services to operate the Commonwealth. But that 4.8% spend was sort of the laughing stock of the country. And what we were able to do during that within the last 8 years was increase that number from 8 to 12%. Last year we had 12% participation. This year we're in the process of completing our annual report. This year, our goal was to spend $1 billion with small diverse businesses across the nation, and I think we've achieved that goal. It is a remarkable turnaround, and we went sort of from the laughing stock to now we're providing technical assistance to many state municipal programs who's calling almost on a daily basis, asking us to provide that level of technical assistance to them.
Wow. So you went from 4% to about 12% in a nearly $1 billion spend with those underserved suppliers.
Yes. Now, the wonderful thing about the disparity study, we probably had one of the most comprehensive disparity studies ever conducted in the nation. And the reason for that was because we've included PennDOT with our federal spend. Huge disparity study. The thing that you should note that the disparity study indicated that the aspirational goal for Pennsylvania should be 26.3% for small diverse businesses, as opposed to that 4.8% that I described earlier in my remarks. Now, put that in context, our neighbors to the south down in Maryland, they were typically doing 25 and 30% of their spend with small businesses. Our friends and our neighbors to the north up in New York, I think they just increased their goal to 35%. So, if you take a look at our disparity study and where it suggests we should be with that 26.3% for SDVs and an additional 4.3% with veteran contractors, this was right in that 30% range, right alongside of our neighbors to the north and our neighbors to the south. I think we're about where we should be. And I can't overemphasize the fact that I think it's a wonderful time to do business in the state of Pennsylvania, particularly if you're a small diverse business.
Perfect. Suppliers, I hope you guys are hearing that. Kerry is looking for you. What I wanted to know now is, could you tell me about the economic impact of this program overall in the state of Pennsylvania and what that's done for the ecosystem?
One of the things I could not wait to develop when I came back to work for Governor Wolf was to put together the Commonwealth's first economic impact analysis as it relates to these businesses, because we're always trying to make the business case for these programs. And here in the state of Pennsylvania, we never had the opportunities to conduct this analysis. So when we conducted this analysis this year on $1 billion spend, and lo and behold, it's just remarkable. Through that spend, through those economic development projects, we've generated 10,000 new jobs. We created 10,000 new jobs by investing in these contractors, 10,000 new jobs. And the remarkable thing is another, I think probably $216 million was also generated in terms of federal and state taxes. Absolutely amazing. And then we did another 1.5 billion in terms of salaries. So that, the economic impact was amazing just through the contracting, the investments that we've made here in Pennsylvania with our small diverse contractors. Now, we've obviously, you always hear people say that, veterans are heroes of the nation. They sacrifice everything, their families, by going and fighting for us and making sure that, we have all the luxuries that we enjoy in America today. But a lot of people, sometimes they don't realize that we weren't doing extremely well by our veterans of Pennsylvania. We're so happy now that not only do we have a 4.6% goal, but we have a legislative mandate to include 3% of all of our procurements with veteran-owned businesses as well. It's just a remarkable thing. I don't think I've seen that anywhere else in the country. And I'll just reiterate the fact that I think it's an absolute fabulous time to do business in the state of Pennsylvania.
So you just touched on legislation and creating policies and mandates to ensure that some of these underserved businesses have a seat at the table. So let me ask you, are there any plans to make policy or legislative changes to support your initiatives now and going forward, thinking about the future and what that would look like?
We introduced legislation back in December to codify our programs. And the reason why that's so significant is because here in the state of Pennsylvania, as I mentioned, our program sort of worked with ebbs and flows. And it really it actually depended on the level of value that the incoming administration placed on diversity and inclusion. As I mentioned, if they had a high value, then we were given the resources that we needed to do the job. If it wasn't, then the programs were left to wither on the vine. And that's and every cycle that sort of happens in Pennsylvania. Through legislation and codifying the program, it would create more consistency for these programs, which it should be. We should not be operating these programs on political wins. It should be something here that we should plan for. It should be a strategic focus as part of our overall economic development plan. And I'm so happy that Governor Wolf viewed it in that fashion. This was extremely important to him. And I'm told that it's extremely important for the incoming administration. And with that, that's why I feel very, very safe and confident in saying that, I can't think of a better time that companies should take a look at Pennsylvania to come in here and really, really engage in a plan to do some serious work in Pennsylvania. I mentioned we're at 12% right now. Our goal is closer to 30%. So we have a lot of room to grow. And in fact, we need all the contractors we can in order to reach our goal out here in the state.
Okay. So let me ask you this. We've talked about some of the challenges in the past and some of the challenges currently and some of the plans that you guys have and the legislation in place. But I want to know, what are some of the main challenges that diverse, women-owned and small-owned businesses face when working with governments? And could you tell me how those challenges have evolved over time?
The greatest challenge is always overcoming that myth that we, our work is not the quality that other subcontractors are, or that we're overpriced, or the quality of our work is not as good, or our delivery time is not at the same pace as non-minority contractors or small diverse contractors. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, we have to overcome the issues of access to capital and access to networks, because those are critically important when you're talking about doing business with any state or private entity. When companies are used to doing business with the same company all the time, they seem to go back to that company, as opposed to exploring and reaching out and trying to bring in new sources, sources of supplies and materials. But no, that's our greatest challenge, is overcoming that myth. And everywhere we go, even today, you hear people say, well, yeah, if you're bringing in minority contractors, it's going to be shoddy work, it's going to be slow delivery time, you're going to have to pay a premium, and it's all been debunked for decades. I stand fast by saying, and I had the privilege of knowing and working with minority and small contractors that's performed at the same level of any of the Fortune 5 companies. In fact, a lot of these companies, they pivot and can change courses and directions at the drop of a dime. That even provides more value to governments and private entities. But no, we have to deal with the myths. We're still dealing with those myths that minority contractors have been wearing like an albatross around their neck for decades. And we still got to deal with, not having the same access, particularly to financial institutions and capital that most contractors have. But those things are extremely critical. Those are things that we continuously work on through our outreach initiatives and networks. I can never suggest or tell you how important those networks are. If we're kept from being a part of those networks or working within those networks, it's going to be extremely difficult to generate business. But as I mentioned, we have to be, you have to keep your eye on the prize here and continue to do whatever it is to gain access not only to capital but to those professionals who work in procurement systems and municipal governments as well as state and federal governments throughout the nation.
Okay, perfect. So, as you're talking about networking being extremely important and, debunking myths and ensuring that, you keep your eyes on the prize, what advice do you have for small and diverse businesses to increase their visibility and their business with government? You mentioned different organizations that they could network with. Do you have any that, you love, or any that you would recommend for people who really want to get out there and become more visible to get those types of contracts?
I used to be the associate administrator for the Small Business Administration in Washington, D.C., in charge of government contracting. And every day we had vendors knocking on our doors. Every day, all those federal agencies had vendors knocking on those doors. I did an assessment once while I was there because I wanted to determine who was receiving the bulk of the contracts in the SBA program. And lo and behold, we found that I think it was close to 80% of the business that was going out under the SBA was going to companies who had a presence within 100 miles of the Beltway. And I stressed that because what these guys were doing, they were establishing relationships with those procurement officers. They were knocking on the doors of all those federal agencies on a regular basis. They was knocking on my door every day, trying to get exposure, submitting, and more importantly, they was going after procurements. They was looking at those forthcoming procurements, all those different agencies, and they would develop strategies on how they were going to actually go out and get those procurements. And it started with developing relationships with a lot of the people, a lot of those buyers and procurement professionals in those agencies. If I could suggest anything to any company out there, I would absolutely suggest if you're targeting Pennsylvania, if you're targeting another a municipality or the federal government, get close to those suppliers, get close to the procurement officers, get close to those agencies so that you can begin to develop those relationships with those entities so they know exactly who you are, know exactly what you provide, and know exactly the quality of your work. And that's extremely important. And in addition to developing those networks and relationships, it's going to also help you begin to debunk the myths that are out there as well. But no, I see successful people as being extremely aggressive and getting to know those agency procurement staff, buyers, etc. And I would suggest that you develop a strategy and incorporate that into your business plan of how you're going to go about attaining that business, whether it be through state government, municipal government, or a private entity. But have a plan.
Perfect. So for suppliers, it's all about strategy, having a plan, getting to know your local, and if you're focused on municipalities and government contracts, getting to know your procurement officials, Networking is really important, and staying steadfast. Well, let me ask you, we've talked to the suppliers about things that they can do, but let's talk about buyers. What are some of the things that you believe that, governments and buyers can do to move the needle forward with their supplier diversity programs? And, what advice do you have for them to get started?
But a couple of things I just want to mention here. Here in Pennsylvania, man, Philadelphia has a wonderful program. Pittsburgh have a wonderful program, but unfortunately, everything in between, you don't see very much. I know the city of Harrisburg is hired a very good diversity and inclusion individual who's putting together a program currently. But all those local municipalities that's out there, you don't see too many initiatives like York, Lancaster, Harrisburg, Chambersburg, Chester, Carlisle, all those little towns in between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. You don't see the policy development. We don't see any policies that would suggest support for these types of initiatives. And I would, we're consistently encouraging those smaller municipalities to take a look at these programs, because if it's consistent across the state, we're going to have less worries about diversity and inclusion. But where you have a lack of policy and a lack of focus on these types of programs, I can almost guarantee you, you're not going to have a whole lot of participation. If there's not a policy, or if there's not an administration who have a high value on diversity and inclusion, you're going to have very little participation as it relates to this area. So what we've been trying to do is trying to encourage smaller municipalities throughout the state to take a hard look at what we're doing here in state government and try to come up with initiatives to try to encourage more spend with small diverse businesses throughout the Commonwealth. But once again, if you take a look at who are where these policies are currently being held up, is you take a look at Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, and most other municipalities, the smaller municipalities, just don't have those policies. And I would submit that you're probably going to find the same thing in other states. The major cities are going to have these initiatives, and then you're going to have a drop off. And a lot of that has to do with whether or not if they have the ability to raise or to conduct a disparity analysis. Disparity analysis are not cheap. In the state of Pennsylvania, I think we spend around $1 million to conduct ours. And smaller municipalities who have greater challenges in terms of resources like that, it's going to be extremely difficult for those smaller municipalities to do that. In fact, we've been doing, we've been engaging disparity study consultants, talking about asking them to take a look at those smaller municipalities and asking them that they can come up with a different kind of a model to make it more affordable for smaller municipalities to conduct disparity analysis so they can get these programs up and running. But no, I think it's extremely, extremely important. If they don't have policies, to take a look at policies that's going to support small business contracting or small diverse business contracting, I can almost assure you, without a policy, without a focus, you're going to have very, very, very little participation.
Wow. Wow. So, it sounds like you want to start off with doing your research. For some, that may be a disparity study. For others, it may be, grassroots, getting into the community and finding out, the disconnect with these businesses and these municipalities. It also sounds like on the supplier side, getting in, doing the work, meeting people, networking, believing. It also sounds like on the buyer side, believing, taking a chance, but also betting and doing the work and having that reinforced by policy and legislation so that it can be something that not only starts there, but continues to grow. These things are so awesome. And we're just so excited that you were able to share those things with us. One thing that I do want to ask you, Kerry, because you've made mention a few times, this is a great time to do business with Pennsylvania. Is there a website that people can log into to kind of register to do business with Pennsylvania, or to see what you guys have out there as far as RFPs and RFQs?
Yes, and two things. if you're not certified as a small diverse business in the state of Pennsylvania, we have 7 third-party certifiers that we use in the Commonwealth. And you can get all that from our website, our DGS website, our BDISBO website. So, you know, you have to be certified, number one. And you have to be certified as a small business and as a small diverse business. It's a self-certification process that you can engage for a small business certification. And as I mentioned, our third-party SDB certification, you have to receive from either the Minority Supplier Development Council or one of our third-party certifiers. And you can get the name of all those certifiers on our website. If you don't have that, Denitra, we'll make sure we'll get the link to you. You can get out to all your participants. Other great thing that you can do here in Pennsylvania, we have a system called eBuilder, and in that system, it's a link to forthcoming procurements that you can take a look at. You can and actually, once you sign up, once you become certified in the state of Pennsylvania, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you're going to be notified of all those forthcoming procurements. You're going to have access to all those forthcoming procurements, in addition to a lot of other information. The wonderful thing about Pennsylvania, particularly BDISBO, is that we have a staff on standby to help you with those endeavors. I mean, if you need assistance getting on an ITQ, if you need assistance getting certified, if you need assistance doing any of that type of work, all you have to do is just call our office, and we'll get someone there to help provide that assistance to you. And by the way, if you need to contact our office, you can contact us at area code 717. The number is 705-5885. Did you get that? 717-705-5885.
Perfect, Kerry. So what I want to do now is, we've got a few questions popping up in our question and answer, and we want to get to as many as possible, since we've got a very busy man on the webinar with us. And so thank you guys for sticking with us. Thank you for listening, and thank you for asking questions. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the question and answer portion. So Daryl Andrews asked, does Pennsylvania have minority business quotas?
We don't have quotas. We have aspirational goals. And our goal in Pennsylvania for small diverse business is 26.3% and an additional 4.6% for veteran-owned businesses.
Perfect. Mr. Tony Rodriguez asked if we could talk about the areas of need in Pennsylvania government, particularly as it relates to professional services.
I'm sorry, what was that again, Denitra?
Tony Rodriguez asked, what are the areas of need in Pennsylvania government, particularly as it relates to professional services?
We buy everything. You know, we buy everything from paper clips to pencils, and build everything from hospitals to highways. There's not very much that we don't procure or build in the state of Pennsylvania. Very large state. And in addition to what we would normally do, particularly with the CARES Act dollars that's come through. I mean, it's you know, the highway dollars that are out there, the dollars for technology that's out there, winterization out there, energy efficiency is out there. I mean, there's so many areas that's in need right now. Is depending on what you do, I would highly encourage you to contact our office. We can have a conversation, and we can point you in the right direction in terms of the space you need to take a look at to see where those opportunities are.
Perfect. And again, Mr. Rodriguez, I think he probably will be reaching out to you, said that many of the issues for minority business is not that they can't do the work, but meeting all of the other contract requirements, including things like cybersecurity insurance. Do you have any insight into that, or any advice that you can give?
That's a new one for me there, I've got to tell you that. But I'll say this, listen, there's a whole lot of things that happen to discourage small diverse businesses from engaging, right? And let me see, Art Fletcher told me this a long time ago. Art was he was really into military strategists, and Sun Tzu was someone he really studied, that Chinese military strategist, and he said that he learned through Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu talked about how to defeat your enemy, and you defeat them by making them feel that they can't win, so they'll stop trying. And let me say that again. Sun Tzu says, you make your enemy feel that they can't win, so they'll stop trying. And what that means from our perspective is, just think about how many times do we go in and start knocking on agency doors and trying to develop relationship and submitting proposals and RFPs. I mean, responding to RFPs or solicitations, and it never seemed to work. And we get frustrated and we just give up and say, well, maybe this is not for us. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that we must be tenacious. We have to be aggressive, and we can never give up. You can never give up. I don't care what the situation is. If we're doing business, we can only learn to get better. And I would encourage you, if you're doing business in Pennsylvania, and if you're hitting that brick wall, reach out to us. We'll march that walk with you. We'll make sure you get into the agencies. We'll make sure you get the information you need. But whatever you do not give up. Don't, because when you do that, they win. And this is just too important. I mean, the doors of opportunities have been opened wide here in Pennsylvania, and we're going to do everything that we possibly can, to assist our customers in doing business with the company.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Kirkland, we have a Josh Robin. He asked, how do you effectively create the outreach to the small, diverse entities and organizations?
We do over 100 outreach events a year, small business events, gatherings. We tie into our small business advocates and stakeholders all the time. And we're out there talking about how to do business in the state of Pennsylvania, what you need to do business in Pennsylvania, what the opportunities are in the state of Pennsylvania, be it healthcare or technology or construction. We try to identify those opportunities and help those individuals identify opportunities so they can go out, so they can not only go after them, but develop a plan to go after those opportunities. And where I see people are most successful is when they come at it from a strategic standpoint, rather than just come in and just look at something and make that and apply or try to respond to an RFP or solicitation. It's generally a long-term strategy or how they're going to do business. And those are the contractors that I see are extremely successful in that.
Perfect. I just want to let you guys know that if you look into the question and answer, the Q&A box, that our actual Vice President of Community Engagement, Ms. Jenny Doherty, has been in the background working and making sure that you guys have access to the links, the phone numbers, solicitation postings, and to the small and diverse business pages for Pennsylvania. So if you want access to any of those, she has so kindly and graciously posted those links for you. We have another question here for you, Mr. Kirkland. The Daryl Andrews Enterprises asked, what is the best way to position a invitation to qualify? They're invitation to qualify certified, so they want to know how can you position that?
Well, the best way to do that, I would highly encourage you to call our office, and our technical staff will help you walk through that process here in Pennsylvania. You definitely want to get on the ITQ list. I don't know exactly what business line he's talking about, but what we can absolutely do is work with him to get him on the appropriate ITQ list that he's seeking to get included in. Once again, I would highly encourage him to just give us a call. We'll connect him directly with one of our staff persons who can provide that level of technical assistance.
Perfect.
That's something that we can take care of in a day.
Oh, okay. I hope Daryl Andrews Enterprises, I hope you guys heard that. Mr. Pat Sanford asked, are there contract points if your business is located in Pennsylvania as a local business?
No, there's no preference points there for that at all. And I want to be very honest. One of the reasons why we sort of stayed away from that at this point, because if we start developing preference protocols in Pennsylvania, we are afraid that our subcontractors in Pennsylvania may begin to be penalized in other states or municipalities as well if they start enacting the same kind of policy. So we've been trying to stay away from those local kinds of initiatives.
Okay. And I'm going to ask this question from Ms. Sally Rutledge. She said, does Pennsylvania acknowledge federal WOSB certifications and allow that designation within the procurement? Or is there another state certification that must also be done?
No, I'm not. No, is that? I'm not exactly sure what that WOSB.
Woman-owned small business.
Yeah, well, the individuals who certify women-owned businesses in Pennsylvania, our third-party certifying partner is WeBank.
Okay, perfect. So you guys, okay. So we have a few more questions that have come in. And what we're going to do, I'm going to ask this one last question, but after that, any questions that we didn't get to answer during this webinar, in order to stay respectful with your time, we are going to answer offline for you guys. The last question I'm going to ask you, Mr. Kirkland, is, did you have any suggestions or experience on bringing more diverse businesses on board in notoriously non-diverse business sectors, especially where AUM is high?
What was that last part? I'm sorry.
Do you have suggestions or experience on bringing more diverse businesses on board in notoriously non-diverse business sectors?
Well, as you know, we're trying to add to our database on a daily basis. We're seeking out contractors at every level. There's nobody out there that we wouldn't take a look at. If you're in business and you're selling or performing a service that the state buys, we're encouraging you to become certified in the state of Pennsylvania. We encourage you to call our office. I mean, the reality of it is we just spent $1 billion and we're at 12%. And we have so much more to do before we even get close to equity here. So I would highly encourage those individuals to contact our office. We'll connect them with a technical assistance staff person, and we'll get them whatever they need to do business here in the state of Pennsylvania. But I cannot emphasize our goals are 26.3% for small diverse businesses and an additional 4.6% for veteran-owned businesses. And it's never been a better time to do business in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania than right now.
We love that. Well, thank you, Deputy Secretary, so much for your time today, for sharing your experience and your knowledge. And we just want to let everyone on the call know that recordings will be coming. And in the interim, you can check out Procurated.com. That is Procurated. And this is where suppliers that are on the call, you can claim and set up your free profiles. And this is also where buyers, whether you're in municipalities, nonprofits, healthcare, or education, where you can search for and discover smaller, diverse suppliers around the country. We are so excited that you guys joined us. You will hear more from us. As you can see on the screen, I have the contact information for Ms. Jenna Gold, who is our Director of Supplier Partnerships, and for me, Denitra Gober, the community, one of the community engagement managers here. Feel free to email us, reach out to us if you want to find out more about Procurated and how you can use this tool to help do some of the things that Kerry definitely spoke highly of, and to get your names out there and to definitely increase that spend in those communities. We are here to help you, and you can utilize us as a resource. Thank you so much, Mr. Kirkland, for your time. And do you have any final parting words?
Just one more thing. I want to give you another number just in case any of the audience want to contact our office again. It's 717. This is a different number, 717-783-3119.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys, and everyone have a fantastic rest of your week. Thank you for joining us, and we will be sending out this recording in the coming days.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.